Welcome back. It's the Sports Hour here on the Arvo Flow. Time to talk about all the weird things happening in the world of sports with our North American sports expert, Eddie Dads from scplaybook.com.au. Great to be with you, Dadsy. How are you?
Good, thank you, Ellis. Another big day of sport around the world, really. It's really kicking off all over the place, isn't it? We've had NFL Sunday over here in the US. Got the World Cup kicking off with the F1 as well. It's a good time to be a sports fan, Ellis.
We'll start where we were always going to start and where everyone's talking about the FIFA World Cup in Qatar at the moment. So much negative press coming out of the country. We addressed that last week, but the World Cup has officially begun. It began on, the early hours of Monday morning for those in Australia. Let's talk about the game itself, Eddie. Qatar losing at home. This was not the fairy tale beginning to them hosting a World Cup. They've broken a record, becoming the first host nation ever to lose the first game of the tournament. Pretty underwhelming effort from the hosts, Eddie, against Ecuador?
Yeah, this is not particularly promising, Ellis. Hopefully, when Australia kicks off their performance, it's a little bit more, competitive than Qatar was. It sort of felt like Ecuador sort of took the foot off the gas in the second half. I feel like they probably could have put a couple more past if they were red hot. But yeah, it was not a great performance from the Qataris. A little bit of controversy, Ellis, really early on in the game, 3 minutes old, when Enner Valencia nodded home a header. So that what looked like the opening goal of the match, only to have it overturned by VAR. Now, Ellis, I've been trying to wrap my head around this. Can you explain it to me a little bit clearer as to why this might have actually been offside, given the goalkeeper was sort of out of the picture? There was one defender behind. Was this actually offside in your opinion?
Well, I was scratching my head, Eddie, trying to work this one out. Obviously, my initial thought was, they've ruled this out because of contact on the goalkeeper, but it was very minimal if there was anything there. And really, it was the prerogative of the Ecuadorian attackers to go in for the ball in the way that they did, because the goalkeeper himself rushed out and he probably wouldn't have been advised to do so. Then we get told that it was actually an offside call. I don't know how it was an offside call, but unfortunately, Eddie, all conspiracies aside, which are pointing to favouritism towards Qatar, we've seen these incidents before with the VAR. So I'm almost not even that surprised, really. But good of you to point out the VAR episode. In the end, Ecuador winning this game 2-0. I do just want to address the BBC coverage going into this, Eddie, because there was a lot made of, how Western broadcasters were going to approach their coverage of the World Cup. BBC going pretty hardcore in an unprecedented way, not televising the opening ceremony to sort of, strengthen their stance against the overall sentiment of Qatar hosting the tournament. What did you make of this pretty brave stance from the BBC, the national broadcaster in the UK, to do this, Eddie?
Yeah, this is unprecedented, in fact, Ellis. I mean, I was trying to think about it before in sort of Australian rules football terms, and this would be like sort of Channel 7 at the start of the Grand Final coverage, just spending sort of half an hour ragging on how bad the AFL is. It was a pretty big, bold moment from the BBC. Like you say, they didn't televise any of the opening ceremony, which had the likes of Morgan Freeman and BTS, and it was a whole big shebang. The BBC didn't publish any of it. Instead, they talked about some of the political misgivings they had about the World Cup going ahead. They talked about a lot of the scandals that we've talked about in recent weeks behind the Qatari World Cup, and BBC decided that instead of showing the opening ceremony, that was a good time to have a crack at FIFA and the whole organisation. So this is bizarre. I don't think I've ever seen this before in any other sport. What did you make of it as a football fan?
Well, I'll just say how I felt about it, and I could honestly poke that many holes in this, Eddie, because the front man of BBC's World Cup coverage is Gary Lineker, the English legend, who has come out and said he doesn't support the World Cup being in Qatar, but at the same time, he's decided to travel and be the leading anchor for the coverage. And on top of that, quite remarkably, he's made a definitive statement saying, I'm not going to Qatar to support support anything that happens in Qatar. I'm just going there to report on the World Cup. I don't exactly understand that myself. If you're there, if you're a part of it, then you're a part of it, and there's no escaping that. So I find it pretty crazy that this is the taxpayer-funded broadcaster doing this, but I guess it is their prerogative to do so. Let's leave Qatar, Eddie. We'll go to the NFL. There's been some more record-breaking incidents occurring over there where you are based, and we're talking about Cordarrelle Patterson. So he plays for Atlanta, the Falcons. Eddie, tell us what the news was that's come out in the last day or so.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool one, Alice. One of these sort of niche NFL records that might never be broken. It's an extremely impressive record. So Cordarrelle Patterson today returned his 9th kickoff touchdown in his career, which breaks a tie for first from 2 other players who are on 8. So Cordarrelle Patterson now officially has the most kickoff return touchdowns in NFL history, which is extremely cool. The kickoff touchdown is when, after a touchdown or a field goal, the kicker kicks it back to the other team and they have to run it from one end of the gridiron to the other. As you can imagine, it's pretty rare for them to happen given there's 12 players trying to stop them. So the fact that Cordarrelle Patterson now has 9 of these in his career is pretty fantastic, Ellis. I personally don't think there's much better in the NFL than seeing someone take the ball 103 yards from one end to the other. I think it's hilarious. But yeah, another big day in the NFL. Lots going on. My Broncos, Ellis, unfortunately, are now 3-7 and look terrible again today, so I'm not too happy about that, but I was enjoying sitting down on the couch watching a bit of NFL Sunday.
I'm sure it'll pick up, but we'll stick with the NFL for now. And picking up from where we left off last week, we were talking about the kicking abilities of certain Australian players who are on the radar of NFL clubs at the moment. Of course, last week speaking about Dustin Fletcher's son, Mason Fletcher. This week it's all about a story that's broken about Matt Burton, the NFL player who plays for the Bulldogs. Supposedly, according to his agent at least, there's been some approaches made by NFL franchises, but it appears that there's going to be a lucrative offer coming his way to remain with the Bulldogs. What do you know about this one, Eddie?
Yeah, I mean, Ellis, I think not to pour any cold water on the story, but I'm not sure that Burton kicking in the NFL was any realistic possibility. But it is interesting that his agent says that he's taken a few calls from NFL scouts who want him to come out and punt at a combine or two. Obviously, Matt Burton has one of the biggest kicks in the world, I would say. I watched a few of his games last year, and I genuinely don't know how other players catch some of the torpedoes that he puts up there. I mean, they're 60-meter bombs that are incredible. They're floating around and incredibly hard to catch for the opposing team. I'd be surprised if he ended up in the NFL, Ellis. I think he's a very, very good rugby league player, Matt Burton. I'm not sure that he'd turn that down to go and come onto a field and kick twice a game in the NFL. Maybe later in his career, there's a possibility for him there. But yeah, again, like we touched on last week, it's great to see Australians getting some attention in one of the biggest sporting leagues in the world.
This could be a bit of black magic from the agent, I think, but we'll park that one there. Certainly stay across it over the next week or so. Now, let's move into the world of AFL, Eddie. We'll talk some AFLW right after this short while, but firstly, I just want to focus on the draft, which is coming up, of course, in the next few days. And, I guess it's an exciting time for you in particular as a Essendon fan because it looks like you might be in for some sweet deals, Eddie.
Indeed, Alice. Now, it sounds like the Bombers are pretty keen on South Australian Matthias Philippou. Obviously, the Bombers have the 4th pick in the draft, but they think they can get Philippou a bit later in the draft because neither of Adelaide or Port Adelaide have their first-round picks. And they think that those are the clubs that were most likely to take him. So I think there's some scuttlebutt around that the Bombers might try and move back a couple of spots in the draft, which I like. We've also got a couple of absolute stars coming in under the father-son rules. Alwyn Davey Jr., obviously a very familiar name to AFL fans. His father, Alwyn Davey, was a mainstay for the Bombers for a few years in the late 2000s. So it's going to be great to have his son on the list next year, and his twin brother Jaden as well. So a very, very talented family, the Davies. It's going to be interesting, Alice. It sounds like it's a very open top 4, top 5 of the draft, which is not something that we always see. Will Ashcroft, I think, is the player of this draft. The Brisbane Lions are going to snap him up with their father-son pick. I've seen some of his stats and highlights from his year in the TAC Cup, and he is something else, Ellis. He's going to walk into an AFL side and average 25, 30 disposals almost right off the bat. So excited to see how he goes about it and excited for the draft.
It'll certainly be a critical point in time for a lot of clubs that really need to pick up their form as per the last couple of years. We'll switch to the women's side of Australian rules, AFLW. Now we're moving into grand final territory this coming weekend. Want to ask you about the last couple of games, the prelims over the last weekend, Eddie. Last year's grand final rematch, Brisbane v Adelaide Crows. A lot of people would have fancied the Crows to go away and get this one done, but they weren't able to in the end, and quite convincingly toppled by the Lions, who look like they're really going to pack a mean punch against the D's at the grand final on Sunday. What did you make of it all, Eddie?
Yeah, as sort of a closet closet Adelaide Crows fan in the AFLW, just because the Bombers didn't have a team there for a bit. I was disappointed to see them go down, Ellis. I was hoping they'd be able to get it done again this year, but unfortunately didn't quite get there against the Brisbane Lions, who were in the grand final last year. Now they've got a chance to win another one. They've been in 4 of the last 7 grand finals, so that gives you an idea of how dominant the Brisbane Lions have been in the women's competition. They're hosting the grand final this week at their new Springfield facility, which is going to be exciting to see. It's brand new, it looks very swanky out there, so it's going to be a great grand final. And of course, the Demons on the other side, Daisy Pearce, who is one of the more beloved figures in the AFL as a media personality and a long-time star for the Demons. It was unbelievably good to see her kick what was essentially the game-sealing goal against the Kangaroos on Saturday afternoon, Ellis. Who are you backing in the grand final? It seems like Brisbane are the favourites, but it would be good to see Melbourne get it done as well.
I hope for what won't be a low-scoring game and a thriller of a game as well. But I think the travel might get the D's, Eddie, particularly given that North stayed in that game for quite a period of time, and I think Melbourne were highly fancied to get over the Kangaroos. So I think this is Brisbane's game to lose.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting one, Ellis. Encourage everyone to get up and get around that and have a look at it. And I think it's coming up this Sunday, the AFLW Grand Final. So it's been another fantastic season. The game continues to grow. It's fantastic to see some of the new teams were really competitive this year. My Bombers women's side was a lot more enjoyable to watch than the men's side this year. So we can just hope the game keeps on growing, Ellis.
2:40 p.m. the action gets underway on Sunday. Eddie, before I let you go, just tell us about what's going on in the world of scplaybook.com.au these days.
There is an absolute stack of cricket content as we get into the BBL, which is kicking off very shortly. We've got squad breakdowns on every single one of the BBL teams, predicted best teams. We've got a tool that helps you out with the buy planning and figuring out which players are playing on which game weeks. There's a lot of good stuff going on there, so check it out, scplaybook.com.au.
Good to have had you on, Eddie. Enjoy the next week of all the sport going on right now around the world. Plenty of it, that's for sure. Great to catch up with you, Eddie Dads from scplaybook.com.au. We'll speak to you next week.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate your time.